I just want to pass that knowledge forward. There's a lot of edge in there. It's like even people on the highest level make mistakes all the time. What's up, everyone? I want to start with sharing my Triton experience. I wanted to give them a shout out. My experience for London has been so amazing. The only bad thing was the bad weather and some limited food choices. And the hotel rooms are so expensive and so small. That's just weird. Like, London's crazy. Besides that, the staff is incredible. It's so well organized. The tables are nice. The dealers are so nice. They take so good care of you. If you have any problem, if you want anything, you just tell them. Nicely organized, and you just have a really good feeling being there. It's almost as good as the Pokercode festival. Let's start with this particular tournament. I final tabled the first tournament I was playing, which was the 25k 7-handed. As you can see, Bruno Volkmann, Chris Brewer, Roman Rabeck, Ibo Town, Brian Kim. Pretty reggy table. Let's start with the first hand. There were a lot of very interesting hands. I had one spot here against Danilo Vilasevic. He's short with 1.15, which is a bit less than 8 big blinds. He's the second shortest. Ibo Town, Tobias Schwecht, has 900k, so a bit shorter than that. I'm on the cutoff and I want to play a very wide range, obviously, because I can put pressure. The button in the small blind can't do that much, and the big blind also is a little bit handcuffed because he doesn't want to get it in too loose. You can put on pressure by two different things. You can put on pressure by open shoving, you can put on pressure by open raising. The strategy that you play in an equilibrium would be you obviously mix, and there's certain hands that prefer to shove and certain hands that prefer to open raise. I would say the generally important thing here is that you understand that you need to shove here even if the button has 20 bigs. I think that's a mistake a lot of smaller stakes players make, is that they just open raise too much and then just don't realize enough of the equity because they have to raise fold then against the small blind reshove or the big blind reshove. I want to dive in a bit into how a spot like this can look. If you look at a range like this, what will happen very often is basically you play a polarized raising range. You have a raise calling range and you have a raise folding range, and you merge it a little bit with certain types of hands. And in this particular scenario, you open shove actually quite a bit. You VP-IP 60%, which is quite a lot from the cutoff, but it just shows how much pressure you can put on. The important thing is that you find these open shoves. I think the questionable hands are how wide do you want to go, how wide do you want to open raise, do you want to expand your open raise folding range, and also do people call correctly against the jam, and also how do they play against the raise? Do they maybe rejam too wide or not wide enough? I do not know Bogdanov that much that I could say whether he does that or not, but I would assume that he's definitely not on the tighter side than what the sim suggests, which leaves a little bit of a problem, because if you have a bit of a negative free roll where they always call the sim output, but sometimes people with reasonable thoughts as well, because there's no perfect way to say what the future EV of calling off 20 big blinds there on the button is, because then he's chip leader and the situation switches and he's actually in a great spot. So I would also make an argument. I would also call a bit lighter on the button. And that's why, and I'm leading to my argument now, is I play a bit wider raising range and I jam a bit less than the sim suggests here, and also VP-IP a little bit less, unless I do it as an exploit where I think that's too tight. So in my mind, I have to be a little more careful than I'm allowed in this sim. And so I widen my raise folding range a little bit, and a hand like ace-6 off for me falls rather clearly. It's like on the cusp, but I would never open jam unless I know my opponents here extremely well and can make very strong assumptions around what their ranges look like. Otherwise, I play it as a raise fold. I raise this hand, and now the big blind shoves. If I open raise ace-6 off against his big blind, look at what he's supposed to go all in with. And that is quite interesting. A lot of players intuitively wouldn't do that. They wouldn't go all in with 9-10 suited. They wouldn't go all in with Jack-10 suited. They would just call and see if they hit a flop or not. And that's a reasonable approach as well. Just against my polarized range, it's better to go all in because I sometimes fold as well. So if you have a less polarized range, you would play maybe a bit different. But here it's like, okay, I have some raise folds as well. So you have some fold equity shoving. If you have no fold equity, then obviously you play a little bit different. A pretty advanced concept actually. But the gist for me in this spot is, okay, I open raised ace-6 off. What the sim can't really evaluate very well is what's the value of all these future spots that can come as well, right? We call it future EV. The idea is, okay, you can calculate maybe you know, 2 or 3, maybe 4 spots in a row with different chip distributions. But we are 7 players or 8 players left in this scenario. You can't really evaluate the value of having an advantageous spot, not over 4 hands, but over 17 hands maybe, or over 25 hands on average. Where I'm chip leader, I'm going to be in favorable spots quite often. How much EV am I generating by keeping a shorter stack alive? And how often and how long is a shorter stack going to be alive? My perception in these spots often is that if players play too tight, I gain a bit more as a big stack. And I think the majority of players nowadays are playing slightly too tight, and some people play a bit too aggressive. So I benefit from keeping the scenario alive. I retain my chip lead, which is also an important part. Obviously, I'm still chip leader if I lose, but let's say if I would be a bit shorter, that's I think also a pretty relevant thing. And I think he shoves tighter than what is being suggested. I wasn't assuming that he would go with all the broadways and the suited broadways. I would think that he plays a bit more call and fold, but maybe I'm wrong in that regard. My assumption there was, okay, giving that a6 off is a slight winning call. I decided to leave it out. Obviously, if he jams the correct range, I definitely have to call, given that I just have to call a bit more than 5 big blinds. But I thought that leaving this particular scenario alive was worth more than that. Looking at it in hindsight, probably a6 off. I would lean towards calling now. I maybe overestimated the idea of keeping him alive. I think it's closer than the sim suggests, but I would probably raise forward like king 8, king 9, but then probably raise call a6 now after diving a bit deeper into the spot. We continue. This was a spot I was actually a bit unsure because chip EV and ICM is quite different, and like solving the spot, like I think it's always a bit weird if you have to think about stuff. Ryan got short, I got a bigger stack now, Bruno is in the middle, so it's like second against first, and Chris is on the more aggressive side trying to punish people in this particular spot, where now I have a7 off, and it's like, okay, for chip EV, I know how to play, and I know similar ICM spots, but now it's a bit more top heavy, like how do I play this hand the best way? Against Chris in particular, I thought that the limp shove is just the play to go. I think he isolates at least the correct frequency and potentially more, never too little, and so I limped this hand. I think some people make the mistake to shove a bit too much of their offsuit ace-x here, to just open rip it, and this was kind of the thing I wanted to check, like this was the assumption I made in game, that I thought limp shove is the better play. I also thought exploitatively it's the better play. What I found pretty interesting here is these like king 7 off, queen 8, and jack 8 off pure open shoves, which really caught me off guard. Basically, the idea here is you can't build these type of equilibriums where it's just, oh, you just shove offsuit aces. Other hands will benefit from that, because if you build this equilibrium, basically what will happen is big blind has a hard time calling off, right? Because you shove strong hands. So what you do is your strong hands protect your weaker hands, and you pick the best weak hands that perform still pretty decent against the calling range of your opponent. Yeah, so this is the equilibrium that develops here. I would have never even considered open shoving jack 8 off here, I have to admit. I would have limped this pure. With the king 6, king 7, I would have thought about it, but the jack 8, jack 9, I just wouldn't really have been part of my toolbox. Basically, there's no raising, just shoving and limping. You want to protect your VP ping range. He will have a lot of incentive to punish you, so you don't really need to do the raising. He will do the raising for you. As you can see here, big blind is not supposed to go too crazy. 38%, I think that Chris will minimum find the 38 and probably goes more in the 50-ish direction. The thing that I found interesting here is he has probably more jams than he's supposed to, because in this particular sim, he's supposed to have 0 jams. I have quite some traps, a6 off, just not really benefiting from that. The interesting part here is actually against the range I'm playing, you want to go more polarized. He didn't really see that. I understand why, because in other scenarios you wouldn't really play it this way. You would play more aggressive with hands like a6 off. It's more a chip EV approach where I play more aggressive, but I actually play rather defensive. So what you do there is, again, you select your value range, you merge it a little bit, and then you polarize towards it. And a6 off is neither in the value range nor is it in the polarized bluffing range, so it's just a pure check. Probably a fair assumption to think that I don't play that passive. I would have played pretty passive, but maybe not that passive. So the raising gets a bit better. This was an interesting one. A lot of assumptions. We are 4 players left. I'm second in chips, but very close with Chris. And Bruno and Brian are about the same. I open raise the cutoff with a7 suited, and now Bruno defends. The flop is 4-4-6. And now basically my idea here is I play like a almost auto c-bet. I maybe build like a pretty small sub range around a checking tree with like aces and king queen suited. This is possible, but I would say the majority of my range I play just a pure B b20, b25, which you can see here. Yeah, you can play a checking range, but I think simplifying to an auto c-bet for like b25, b20 is totally fine. 250 into 1.1. He calls. Now the turn is a queen of spades. I was assuming that this plays as a raise heavy strategy for the big blind. You can see the big blind response here. A lot of check raising with 4x, a lot of check raising with gut shots. This is run with ICM. Against a small size, you play flush draws, you play a gut shots, king jack off with a club, or generally 2 overs with a club. Those want to continue, but you generally want to play raise heavy strategy, build a lot around your 4x. I just punish him having to slightly overfold like 2 overcards, and then he punishes me with his 4x advantage and mostly builds around his raising tree. And in the calling range, you mix in some 4x, like 4-6 I thought would call all the time, but actually it raises quite a lot too. Few 4x traps, but then mostly it builds around flush draws, I would assume, and 2 overcards so that you have some board coverage. And the strongest 2 overs and 6x are your main interested hands around the check calling range. So now the interesting part is on the queen of spades. So I want to share my assumptions. I was thinking that he would be check raising a lot of his 4x, that he probably traps sometimes, but I wasn't thinking like, oh, this is a thing where he particularly often traps 4x. And I think the queen is generally a pretty good card for me. He can't continue that much queen x, so generally I want to continue quite a lot here. My main checking range is built around the best showdown hands and all the value, and basically all the bluffs I have want to bet. So now the thinking is, okay, where does showdown value start? It definitely starts at hands that beat hands that he check called that have some showdown value. Ace jack suited I would have never bet here, ace 10 I would have never bet, ace 9, ace 8 is close, and ace 7 is in my mind where now it starts to almost function as a bluff. So basically ace 5 and worse I always bet, and ace 7 is on the fence where I tend to bet, and then the better ace x I always check, or almost always check. That's a bit my thinking there. And like ace 9, ace 8 of clubs I would bet. So it's basically a bit of this nature of thinking, and then almost all the rest I think goes into the betting, because I have a lot of value that I can still bet, and I have enough bluffs to fill in there. Showdown value and some traps go into the checking. The rest goes into value betting and bluffing. He continues with 6x. He has some queen x that improved. In this sim he's supposed to jam actually a lot, like king queen, queen jack just should go all in. Calls are like 6x a lot, and then some flush draws like queen 5 of clubs, I think, queen 3 of clubs, queen deuce of clubs is like sometimes there. But it's basically around ace x, like ace 10 sometimes, which I don't think he will find. Like I think he will fold a little bit more there. That's also why I like the bluff a bit more. I don't really think he gets there with ace x very much. And 6x, like I think a lot of it is just 6x. I think he raises less 6x than he's supposed to in a sim. That's why I'm generally betting here to attack 6x, but it's mostly also to fold out like open-enders, gut shots, flush draws. I hit the river ace and I actually felt pretty good about it. I thought, okay, he raises basically all his 4x on a previous street, like he maybe has some traps, sure. But I was mostly thinking, okay, I'm basically never beat. 6-4 maybe, queen 4, a random 4 is just a really tiny percentage of his range. So I'm just like, oh, this is a very clear value shove. Like every ace is value shoving. He has some queen x that I think he should be calling, you know, especially if he has like queen 3 or something, you probably just have to call that. And then some ace x. But besides that, it's just really, you know, you have a lot of 6x in this spot. You have like jack 6, 10 6, like those hands you will probably just all fold, and then you call some other stuff. He had king 4 suited. Probably all scenarios almost always just should always raise this combo on the flop. But it's interesting to see that I don't think it's a bad adjustment to call this particular hand against me, because I'm genuinely looking for spots in these aggressive lines to punish capped ranges, and so he uncapped his range by like putting in a hand in that spot. I genuinely think against my cutoff opening range, you probably want to charge my 2 overs more and like want to charge me in terms of equity, so you should probably check raise this hand, and you probably gain more by check raising. But I really understand why he puts it in these passive lines. I think that's generally a really smart thought that shows that he thinks that I'm too aggressive, that I put in too many chips on these particular runouts, that I bluff too much potentially in these spots where he's capped, and I think that's a pretty good assumption. So I found this a very interesting hand that I obviously wanted to take a deeper look at.
And yes, he is losing chips here, practically all of them. Fedor is going to fall down to around 3.6. Going to reveal the bad news to Fedor Holz.
We have this last hand that I found very interesting, just pretty quickly. I found this a cool hand because I was pretty short. I had